Hello Classic Crew, and welcome to today's video where we're going to be talking about how to be a more classic person by relaxing and not sweating the small stuff. So last year when Jacob and I were still living in Nebraska, we went to Barnes & Noble, and of course I wanted to go over and look at the bargain books. They usually have some really great options, and I love just perusing and seeing what's available because it's all in a very affordable price range. And I happened to come across this book right here. Now it came with a cover, but I actually despise book covers, so I took it off. But this is Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and It's All Small Stuff by Richard Carlson. I've mentioned this book on my channel before because I loved reading it and I thought it was so valuable, but I thought it would be great to do a more in-depth video examining just a few of the things that he talks about in this book. I loved the format of this book because he wrote it in 100 chapters, and each chapter is a page or 2 pages and really gives you a very quick little piece of advice that if you're feeling stressed or anxious or you just need a second to calm down, you can pop over to this book, flip through, and find just something short and easy to kind of calm you down. If you're new to my channel, I talk about commentary, beauty, lifestyle, fashion, and opera, all from a conservative and classic perspective. So if that's something you'd be interested in, we'd love to have you join the Classic Crew, so feel free to subscribe and make sure to ring that notification bell. I think a huge part of being classic and being a classic woman is having your stuff together. Not allowing yourself to get overwhelmed, not allowing yourself to feel anxiety a lot of the time. And it's not to say that you can't be overwhelmed sometimes, it's not to say that you can't be anxious sometimes, but a classic woman is able to gather herself and get things done instead of sinking into those feelings too often. And a book like this is really good at allowing us as people to collect ourselves and recognize what's important and give us some perspective. So today I chose 5 lessons from this book that I want to share with you guys, and I'm really excited, so let's get into it. So I want to start off with lesson number 6, which is remind yourself that when you die, your in-basket won't be empty. I loved this lesson, and I think it's so easy for us to get caught up in the little tasks of everyday life and think that once we get all of those done, then we'll be happy. Then we can relax and sit down and spend time with our loved ones and have a good time and just chill out. But once those tasks are done, you're going to have new tasks added to your list of to-dos. And you never want your inbox to be empty for too long because that would mean that your time isn't in demand. So it's actually a good thing to have things in your to-do list. But acting as if those things are all going to get done and constantly putting off the things that really matter, the time that you spend with your family, the time that you spend with your friends, the times that you enjoy living your life, that's the stuff that counts. I really like what he writes here. The nature of your in-basket is that it's meant to have items to be completed in it. It's not meant to be empty. In reality, almost everything can wait. Very little in our work lives truly falls into the emergency category. I just love the way that he puts things into perspective in 2 sentences. The idea that, yes, things are important in work, and it's important to be responsible and get things done. But at the end of the day, if you're a naturally responsible person, or if you're someone who has worked to be responsible, you also have to have balance and an understanding that things will get done because you're responsible, but it's also important for you to take time and enjoy time with the people that you love and to find inner peace and to invest time in your relationship with God, for example. These are things that are invaluable, and your to-do list will always be there because your to-do list is always going to be changing and fluctuating with the things that you get done and the things that get added. And I think it's really important that he says it, remember when you die, your in-basket will still be full, because the fact is that when we do die, we're still going to have a to-do list and those things will get done by someone else. But the things that won't be able to get done by someone else are the quality time that you spend with those around you and the time you have enjoying your life and investing in your relationships and the things that really matter. So I absolutely love that lesson, and it's one that I reference when I'm feeling overwhelmed. Definitely something to keep in mind. The next lesson I want to talk about is number 23, which is experiment with your back burner. So Dr. Carlson talks about the back burner on your stove. The idea that there's a burner on the back of your stove that while you're making dinner, you can put something in the back and it'll simmer and it'll cook while you don't really do anything. Maybe you're making rice, or you're preparing something that just needs to sit and you're not stirring, you're not actively engaging with that food preparation, you're just turning it on and letting it do its thing. What he suggests is sometimes there are problems that we have that it's better to allow to put on the back burner. Now, what he's saying is not that you should procrastinate or deny that that problem exists. What he's saying is that sometimes when you allow things to be put on the back burner of your mind, you can kind of solve them in the background. You don't have to be actively engaging with that problem or analyzing the solution. Something might just be kind of resolving itself in the background of your mind. Essentially, there are times that we don't have a really good answer, and even sitting on it doesn't really help. Sitting and thinking about it doesn't really help. But if we allow our minds and trust our minds to just maybe take control by letting it just work on the background while we deal with other things, it will get resolved. And by doing that, it reduces the stress of everyday life because you're able to say, okay, I can't solve this right now, but it will be solved. And I trust myself that I'll be able to figure it out. And this is a difficult one for me because I'm somebody who's very proactive and I like to solve things actively. But there are some issues that you can't solve actively and that you can't just push through a resolution. Sometimes you do just need to let it kind of get solved in the background while you live your life. And I think this is a really good kind of way to say, slow down. Sometimes your involvement is not actually that helpful. And I love that idea, and it is a way to reduce stress, I think. The next piece of advice is number 48, which says, remember that everything has God's fingerprints on it. I love this idea. The idea is that it's easy to see God's presence in the beautiful things in the world by looking at a beautiful sunrise or seeing a beautiful, healthy child or enjoying time with a loved one. It's harder to see God's presence in the things that are upsetting, in loss, in tragedy, even in life's little problems. But once you see the holiness in everyday things and in things that don't necessarily make you happy, you start to feel peace. You start to see God's presence in every part of daily living, good or bad. God's presence alone makes something special. And it's an amazing thing once you start to realize that God is in everything and that God's presence is everywhere. When you're having a difficult time, it's so important to remember that God is there and God is in that thing that's frustrating to you or upsetting to you, that God is in all things. When something isn't going your way, recognizing that God is involved in every aspect and He is part of your life in every way you can imagine. That is incredibly calming to me. And when I start to feel upset or overwhelmed, remembering that things are part of God's plan, remembering that God is involved in my life, that gives me a sense of relief because it reminds me that I don't have to be in control of every day. God is in control. And if we can't see the beauty in something, it doesn't mean that God's presence isn't there. It just means that we haven't opened our minds enough to see God's presence in something that otherwise is hard to see. Anytime I think about God's presence, it does bring me comfort, and it reminds me that we're not alone and that everything is part of His plan. The next one I want to talk about is number 79, which is stop blaming others. Often when things aren't going right, we blame other people. We assume that somebody else is the problem. And here in the chapter, he gives a bunch of examples. If something isn't where you left it, then someone else must have moved it. If the house is a mess, then someone else made it dirty. If the car isn't working, then your mechanic didn't fix it right. What Richard Carlson points out is that when we blame others all of the time, it means that we don't take responsibility for our own feelings and pursuit of happiness because other people are causing our unhappiness. Being happy has to be based on your own actions, and constantly blaming other people for why you're feeling the way that you're feeling means that you're never responsible for owning up and growing and being better so that you can bring your own happiness. And if you're constantly blaming others for your unhappiness, you're also never going to have real peace because you don't feel in control of your life. Everyone else is making you unhappy. Of course, there are times where there are other people responsible for how you're feeling or what's going on, but you can't go to that all the time because it's not good for you, and it's not ultimately going to make you feel more relaxed or more at peace or happier. So at the end of the day, when you're frustrated that the house isn't clean, clean it up yourself. When you're unhappy, remind yourself that you are the one who has to make you happy. No one else can make you happy if you aren't willing to put in the work yourself. When you blame other people, you don't have control over your own happiness because you think everyone else is causing you to feel this way. And it's so much more empowering to think, hey, I'm in control of my choices. I'm in control of my moods, and I'm in control of how I perceive the world and how I maneuver in the world. And that makes you feel so much better at the end of the day than constantly blaming others and then really never feeling better. The last lesson I want to share with you guys today is number 92, which is realize the power of your own thoughts. I love this chapter. I adore this chapter because it's so important. Here we're talking about the idea that in order for you to have an emotion, you have to think something first. And it's really easy to think that moods just kind of come out of nowhere because you feel like you're aware that you're thinking all the time. But clearly we're not aware that we're thinking all the time because we don't even think about the fact that we're breathing. Up until this moment, you probably didn't even realize that you're breathing. That's what he says in the book, and it's true, right? Until I point out that you breathe in and out all day, every day, you're not aware of it. And that's the same with your thoughts. You don't realize that your thoughts will go in a certain direction or something will start to kind of percolate in your mind, and then all of a sudden you're feeling a certain way. It's so important to recognize that when you're feeling down or unhappy, it's coming from negative thoughts. And the thoughts are the thing that started those feelings in the first place. So if you start to recognize that a bad mood or a bad feeling has passed over you, and then you kind of think about what you were thinking about before that feeling hit you, you can say, oh, that's just a thought. That's just a thought. And then you can shoo it away. You can say, I don't need to think that. I don't need to feel that. Or you can say, it's interesting I had that thought. It's interesting that I'm having this feeling, and I'm just gonna let it pass over me instead of really kind of linger. And I think that's a huge thing because moods can really feel like you can't escape them. And if you recognize that moods are as fleeting as any other thing, and thoughts are as fleeting as any other thing and treat it as such, then you can come out the other side feeling like, okay, this is just kind of an annoying emotion I'm experiencing right now. This is a bad thought that I'm having right now, but I don't need to examine it or feel it more than that. And of course, if there's a reason for that, if it's coming out of something specific, a circumstance, then maybe you need to examine it. But if it's coming out of nowhere, sometimes bad thoughts just hit us. They do, they just happen. And if that does happen, recognizing that it's just one of those things that happens and letting it go away and fly away and not spending too much of your time just allowing yourself to sink into that bad emotion, it's such a huge game changer. And it's something that I've really found valuable after reading this book, is recognizing that sometimes you can just let those bad feelings go away. Just like let them fade instead of trying to analyze every single one. Because it's so natural as people to have bad thoughts. Of course it's gonna happen. So constantly trying to say, well, if I have a bad thought, there has to have been a reason. It's too much pressure on us to never have bad thoughts, because even the happiest person in the world has negative thoughts sometimes. So that's it for today's video. I hope you guys learned something and enjoyed it. I so recommend picking up this book. I'm gonna link it in the description box below. I absolutely love it, and it's so easy to read, and it's so nice to just have on your bedside table whenever you're feeling a bad feeling or bad thought. This is such a nice book to have at your disposal. I hope you guys learned something. Let me know in the comments which of these 5 lessons you enjoyed the most, or if you have any other advice, please leave it down below. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell. If you'd like to subscribe to my newsletter, head over to the description box. There will be a link there for you to subscribe, and you will get a little dose of classic into your inbox just twice a month. If you would like to follow me on social media, it's at Classically Abby, absolutely everywhere. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!